Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video I have my Game Week 7 team selection and the wildcard is active, so I'll take you through that team and the players that I'm currently considering. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, let's jump into the Game Week 7 team selection. And just a little bit of context, if you are new to the channel, firstly, please do consider subscribing. But secondly, I obviously decided not to wildcard last week, which was very popular. And in all fairness, I think wildcards in Game Week 6 were very unlucky. But the general justification for it was I kind of felt my team for Game Week 6 was pretty good. And I knew by delaying the wildcard by 1 week, I would have an extra week of information, of course. And I might make some decisions slightly differently. But the big issue is I've lost out on a lot of team value. So it was weighing that up. Do I go in Game Week 6, which felt a week too early, but I would gain a lot of team value because a lot of players rose in price last week, and also a lot of my players that I had fell in price? Or do I wait, except that I think I lost like 0.9 to a million in team value, which was a big hit, but I get that extra week of information. In general, I'm probably glad I waited. But I am looking at my team now and thinking if I had an extra 0.5 to a million, I could do a lot more with my team. So do bear that in mind. But I'm also extremely happy with where the wildcard's at. I haven't changed the wildcard now for 48 hours, and I know that doesn't sound like a massive deal, but for me it is. In a week when I'm wildcarding, I tinker a lot, I think about it a lot, and I make very minor adjustments, and I've not actually changed any of the 15 players now for 48 hours. So I'm feeling pretty settled, and this is a very obvious point, but you can't own everyone. And in any FPL season, of course you can't own everyone. You only have a certain amount of budget and 15 players. But also this season, because pretty much every premium is returning, you've got Haaland and Salah immediately doing very well. Watkins is performing extremely well too. You've got Son and Foden, who right now don't seem to be doing as well, but they will come into our thinking. And of course, the likes of Saka and Palmer. But not only those players, you've also got the likes of Trent, Arsenal defence, Gvardiol, who now looks to be coming into a nice run of form and fixtures. And then you've even got those medium-priced players such as Mbeumo and Solanke and Maddison. So you can't own everyone, and especially if your team value isn't perfect, you have to decide where you want to sacrifice, and it's not particularly nice regardless of where you sacrifice, but I've had to settle where I am now, and I'm trying to think ahead to what do I think the structure will be coming out of this period, going into sort of Game Week 7, 8 and beyond. Where do I think people want to be getting their teams to? Because, of course, this is my wildcard. So I don't get a second wildcard now until Game Week 20 and beyond. So I'm trying to think ahead slightly and think, where do I think people want to be transitioning their teams into? And as you can see already, when you glance at my defence, there's not much money invested in my defence. And it's because I can see people starting to take a little bit of money out of their defence and invest it into the midfield. So, with all of that being said, this is my wildcard team for Game Week 6 with 0.2 million in the bank. So, the big change from my wildcard draft that I showed you earlier on in the week is I've come back around to double Arsenal defence. And I've been going sort of back and forth on this because I still think that Raya, whilst he is an incredible goalkeeper and is playing for the best defence in the league, I still don't think he's as good as we've seen from an FPL perspective earlier in the season, because he's made a ridiculous number of saves. I think he's had 6 bonus points, which is well clear of the rest of the goalkeepers. If we think Arsenal are as good defensively as we think they are, and they are, to be honest, we saw against PSG, they conceded less than 0.3 XG, which was the lowest XG PSG have ever accumulated in the Champions League. So that goes to show how good they are. Raya just won't make that many saves, which means he won't get the bonus points. So I don't think every week we're looking at 8, 9, 10 pointers from Raya. It's realistically a 2 or a 6, especially when the fixtures are better. But then I look at it and I don't really like any of the cheap goalkeepers. Lots of people have Flecken. I don't really trust Brentford defensively, although Flecken I'm sure is fine. You could have a Verbruggen, a Sells, Sanchez, Pickford. Like, there are some other goalkeepers that I don't mind. And in all honesty, Pickford would probably be the one I'd go for because he makes a lot of saves, but Everton also aren't terrible defensively over a larger sample size, and they're going into a nice fixture run. But even Pickford, I'm like, do I really trust Everton right now defensively to have one of their players starting every single week for me? So I just landed back on Raya and Gabriel. And if I just go over to the official site just to show you what sort of turned my head. So the next two, you think there's a very good chance for a clean sheet, right? Southampton, Bournemouth. And then it was these few here. I was like, do I really want to put in Raya? Do I see many clean sheets? Firstly, Arsenal keep clean sheets against pretty much everyone, especially in away games. We know how good their record is. So do I see clean sheets here? On paper, less likely, but if I told you Arsenal kept 3 or 4 clean sheets in these 5, you wouldn't be that shocked. I think 2 to 3 is probably quite realistic. And are there any goalkeepers that are getting more than 2 clean sheets over the next 5? quite unlikely. And then this is what really made me want to go back to double Arsenal defence, which is this run here. And you have to remember, you all have free transfers. So if you decide, actually, I want to make a goalkeeper transfer, that's absolutely fair. But I don't ever feel like using a transfer on a goalkeeper feels particularly optimal to me. And so if I have double Arsenal defence with Raya in goal for this spell here, it just feels safe. It feels easy, right? I feel like even if Arsenal went 2 or 3 games in a row without keeping a clean sheet, you kind of know that eventually they'll probably bounce back. And listen, if we get new information, let's say over this spell here, Arsenal only keep 1 or 2 clean sheets somehow, well then, yeah, I might decide to downgrade Raya. But for now, it feels like a very safe option and probably a good use of the funds. So it was this little spell here which made me decide, you know what? Probably double Arsenal defence is a nice, safe way to invest my funds in that position. So it is quite expensive because I now have to start a 4.5 defender as well as Lewis each week, but I feel like it's worth it. So that's why Raya and Gabriel in there. And obviously Gabriel himself has such great attacking threat that it's not just the clean sheets for him. So Raya and Gabriel there. I have gone for Rico Lewis. I will be honest, if I had the money, I'd still be very tempted to go Gvardiol over Lewis, just because I think Gvardiol's minutes are slightly more secure. But Lewis is the one that is playing in more attacking positions. And actually in the Champions League, he accumulated over 1.6 XGI. Now, it wasn't a particularly difficult game, or wasn't a particularly difficult opposition, but that just still goes to show that this man is not playing as a defender. You've got a £4.7 million City defender in the game. And by the way, as much as City find a way to concede, they are a very good defence with an incredible run of fixtures. Fulham, Wolves, Southampton, Bournemouth, Brighton, playing as virtually a number 10 for them, at the very worst a number 8. Now, I don't know what setup they're going to go for moving forward. Will they play Gvardiol at left back with Walker at right back with Lewis in an out-and-out midfield role? Will they play Walker at right back, Lewis at left back, and will it be Gvardiol that misses out? Or, what I think is more likely, most of the time it will be Gvardiol and Lewis as the fullbacks with Lewis inverting. I don't know what Pep will do this week. And in all honesty, if I had to predict now, I don't think Lewis starts against Fulham. So you might say, why is he in there? I just think over the next 5, even if he is benched in 1 or 2 of them, the upside is really there. And I feel like with my other defenders, they've got okay fixtures. I can cover him. So I don't want to miss out on what I think Lewis could get in one of these games is a clean sheet and multiple attacking returns because of the positions he's playing. Lewis has in his locker something that I would argue other than Trent, no other defender in the game has at the moment, which is like a 20-plus pointer. And I know that's crazy to say when we've never seen that from him, but because the clean sheet potential is always there and because of where he's playing, I just feel a goal and an assist, plus potentially more, is there in a given game. So I feel like it's worth the risk and the upside, but I do acknowledge that his minutes probably aren't going to be perfect. So Lewis is in there just to also, it's nice to have 2 Arsenal defenders and a City defender for not that expensive. But due to me wanting to squeeze so much funds in the attack, which you'll see in a second, I then do have very cheap players in the remaining 3 positions. But let me talk you through them. So the starting defender for me at the moment, the 4.5, is Leif Davis. Again, I don't think people will like this particularly, but you have to bear in mind, people don't like a lot of picks, and it's just a gut feeling one for me. I'm feeling pretty confident with this pick because if you've watched my videos all season, I've been raving about Leif Davis since game week 1. He's got attacking threat like very few players that we've ever seen. And I know he's playing for Ipswich, and Ipswich don't score many goals, and he himself hasn't had many attacking returns this season. But I am a data-driven manager. Even if you're an eye test-driven manager, he's on all set pieces pretty much for Ipswich, at least a lot of them. His open play crossing is exceptionally strong. He's got the most final third entries out of all Ipswich players, the second highest final third touches out of all Ipswich players. He is, as in a similar way to Lewis, but in a very different position. He's basically an attacker that's listed as a defender. So I think assists, at the very least, are coming for Davis, even if it's from a set piece. And when I look at all of the other 4.5 defenders, whether that be like a Collins or a Pinnock, I don't think clean sheets are that likely for Brentford, and they've not got more attacking threat than Davis. Even like a Levi Colwill, because I think Chelsea are actually better defensively than people give them credit for. They've not got great fixtures coming up, and also he doesn't carry that much attacking threat. There's Dunk, there's Konsa, but everyone's kind of got an issue associated with them at that cheaper price. Van de Ven seems to be very popular this week, but I don't think Van de Ven will consistently get attacking returns if you look at his data over a longer sample, and also Spurs are not the best defence in the league. So I just thought, listen, if I don't think any of these cheaper defenders are that likely to get clean sheets, or they all have slight issues associated, just trust your gut feeling. And I just feel like Leif Davis has a very high ceiling given his attacking threat. Because even with the changes to the bonus point system where defenders lose bonus points when their team concede, Davis is still extremely high on the bonus point system, even when Ipswich concede due to the actions that he makes. So listen, again, I'm not asking you to follow me or suggest that you copy this at all, but I've just got a bit of a gut feeling about Leif Davis. And something I said in the last couple of weeks is I want to get my mojo back with FPL and I want to start trusting my gut feeling more. And Leif Davis is a bit of a gut feeling pick. Now, the good thing about him is that his fixtures are also exceptionally good. West Ham, Everton, Brentford, Leicester in the next 4 is really strong. So I'm also targeting the fixtures, but I don't have to play Leif Davis this week or any week really, because I've also got 2 other defenders with a really nice set of fixtures coming up. Now, Vandenberg is the first. I've asked now 4 different Brentford fans, because I know fans aren't always the most reliable, but I like to get some more opinion. 3 of them said that they expect Vandenberg to start every game, and 1 of them was a little bit more hesitant, but all of them said that he's not fully nailed. It really depends. Do they play a 4 at the back or the 5 at the back? When is Henry back? And once Henry's back, if he stays fit, he's obviously going to be the starting left back. Who does that push out to right back? And then will Vandenberg play as like a right centre back, a right back, or will he drop to the bench? There are a lot of moving parts with that Brentford defence, but it just feels like he could have a really high ceiling, because he's already shown he's got a little bit of attacking potential. And he's only a 4 million defender with a really nice set of fixtures coming up. Obviously, if I had the money, let's say I had an extra 0.3, maybe I go for a 4.5 defender instead of Vandenberg, just to give me a little bit safer rotation. And some people will point to maybe like a Leicester defender or a Greaves and just say, go for a defender that you know will start every week. But because I really want to go for Davis, I don't know that I want Greaves as well. Because in the weeks that I don't want to play Davis, I obviously won't want to play Greaves either. So I know it's a 4.0 defender on the bench as my first sub at the moment. That doesn't sound great. But this week alone, I'd be very surprised if he doesn't start. And as long as he continues to play well, given the money that they spent on him, I think he'll continue to be in the starting 11. So let's see how that goes. But Vandenberg is in there. He's got Wolves at home this week, which I think is a decent fixture. And then Mykolenko is my other one. People won't like Mykolenko because they think Everton absolutely stink. And to be honest, this season thus far, they've not been good defensively. But last week against Palace, they conceded less than 1 XG, which is their best defensive performance of the season. And it's no surprise because Jared Branthwaite was back. And I'm not saying I expect Everton to keep the most clean sheets in the league or anything like that. But we saw last season, I believe Everton didn't have a clean sheet in the first 5 or 6 game weeks, because I owned Pickford last season in the first 5 or 6 game weeks. We then all sold Pickford, if you remember, and then they went on a ridiculous run of keeping clean sheets. So teams can go on a really terrible run at the start and then change and then improve their defence. And with Branthwaite being back, I think they will. So for me, Mykolenko is a very smart investment. If you look at the fixtures coming up for Everton, I just feel like he covers me quite well. So what you might notice is I've gone with Davis, Vandenberg and Mykolenko, who all have exceptionally good fixtures over the next 5 or 6 weeks, which will lead to some bench headaches. My thought process behind that is I might realise, actually, Ipswich are like that bad defensively and Davis isn't getting forward, that I don't really want to start Davis regularly, so he can just drop to my bench. Equally, I might realise that actually Vandenberg isn't going to start, and I got that one wrong, in which case I'm glad I've got Davis and Mykolenko with good fixtures. And the final thing on it is I don't know that Lewis is going to start every week. If we get a leak in any of the upcoming 5 weeks that Lewis doesn't start, well then great. I've got 3 players with really good fixtures that I don't mind starting pretty much every week over the next 5 or 6. So there has genuinely been a lot of thought that has gone into this defence. It might just look like I've gone for double Arsenal defence Lewis and then cheaped out. But I feel like the combination of Davis, Vandenberg, Mykolenko covers me quite well for any issues with Lewis. And then also I can rotate that 3rd spot depending on about how I'm feeling at that moment. I do acknowledge that in maximum 4 or 5 weeks, I'm probably looking at needing to use a defender transfer. But if all goes well, I'll have the free transfers to use. So that is an incredibly long section on the defence, but I feel like it deserves some justification. I'm actually very, very happy with it considering how cheap it is. The only thing to note is, of course, I don't have Trent Alexander-Arnold. And someone very rightfully commented, Ross, 2 or 3 weeks ago, you said Trent was like the most essential player in the game. What has changed? I did say that ahead of what was a very nice run of fixtures, like back-to-back home games against Forest and Bournemouth, going into 2 decent away games against Wolves and Crystal Palace. And I know he's got a good fixture this week, but he's now going to a much more difficult run of fixtures. And also, his expected assist has dropped off slightly. In those opening 2 or 3 games, it was remarkably high. And it's still good. He's still got that attacking threat. I still think Trent's amazing. But there has been a drop-off in the attacking data. And going into the run of fixtures they have now, I think he is less essential. Does that mean I think he's a bad choice? No. I am desperate to try and get him in. But as you'll see in a second, I just think there are really good premium attackers that I'd like to squeeze in slightly more at the moment. So Trent sadly has to make way. And again, if I'm thinking about the structure that I see people moving to going forward, it's moving away from the expensive defenders and back in to more expensive midfielders. So that is the defence. Let's move on to the midfield. So moving on to the midfield, and it is currently Mbeumo, Palmer, Saka and Rodgers with Dibbling on the bench. And it's quite an imbalanced midfield, I would say, which is the main issue that I have with it. But I know that won't always be the case. But what I mean by that is I've got Palmer and Saka, who are obviously incredibly expensive, 2 premiums. I've got Brian Mbeumo as well. And then I've got Rodgers and Dibbling, who are 2 very cheap midfielders. So whilst I have a lot of money invested into the midfield, which I think is ideal wherever you can, I also acknowledge that 2 of the positions are extremely cheap. So I don't like that imbalance, but I will explain in a second that I think I'll free up some funds pretty soon, which will allow me to just invest a little bit more money into those Rodgers and Dibbling spots. So I'll actually start with Brian Mbeumo, just because he feels like one of the most obvious picks in the team. I've spoken about on so many occasions that when I look at players, I'm like, what do you want from them? You want minutes, penalties, data, eye test, fixtures. Brian Mbeumo's got all of that and more. The only concern with Brian Mbeumo, which I still think is a greater concern than anyone is giving it credit for, is the absence of Wissa. Because I know he scored last week and also the week before, I believe, without Wissa. But outside of that, I don't think Brentford's overall performances have been as good. In fact, last week against West Ham, who are arguably one of the worst defences in the league at the moment, they still accumulated the second lowest XG of all teams in the Premier League last week. So it wasn't overall a particularly strong attacking performance. And I do just question moving forward. Obviously, once they have Sharda there and Carvalho and they've got up to speed, maybe they'll be okay. But I do just question how strong they're going to be from an attacking perspective. And as good as Mbeumo is, he can't do it all himself. So I still think he's great. But I do wonder if in 2, 3, 4 weeks, maybe we won't, but we might start to think, actually, he's not getting as many opportunities to score and create. Maybe we start to look elsewhere. But for now, that's only a hypothesis. And what I have to go on is that he's getting attacking returns. He's got strong underlying data and he's got those penalties, set pieces, minutes, fixtures. Everything is there for him. So Brian Mbeumo will be in my team. And then the other players are Palmer and Saka. So I've got both of them in here. And I've been going back and forth on this all week, right? Because I think the maximum number of premiums, unless you go without Haaland, you can squeeze in, is 3. So it's Haaland, and then you've got Palmer, Saka, Watkins, Foden. If Son's fit, you could go there if you wanted to. And also, I suppose you could squeeze Trent in as a premium, although he's obviously cheaper, but he's a premium in his own position. So let's say that for me, I think I decided that I wanted to have 2 premium attackers along with Haaland. So let's say I say no to Trent. It's basically 2 from Palmer, Saka and Watkins. I can't have all 3 and Haaland. It's just not feasible when I want the other players that I want. So I have a bit of a gut feeling that Watkins is going to continue to do very well. But I've chosen Palmer and Saka for now for a few reasons. Firstly, with Watkins, I feel like with Watkins, he has real direct competition that Palmer and Saka don't have. So with Watkins, whilst Duran could play alongside him, and I think Emery will try to continue to have Duran and Watkins on the pitch together, we saw in the Champions League, Watkins went off early again, Duran comes on and scores again, and he's looking so good that I would not be shocked to see one game, not very often, where Duran might get the start ahead of him, especially if it's a slightly easier fixture, or we might start to see Watkins get some earlier subs again like he did earlier on in the season. Either way, Palmer and Saka just don't have that same level of competition in terms of players that can come in and do the role that they do. So that is one thing. The next thing is that Watkins doesn't have penalties or set pieces. With Saka and Palmer, they both have penalties and they both have set pieces. So when I look at direct competition and also routes to points, Palmer and Saka just are better. And also, Palmer and Saka have the extra point for a clean sheet and the extra point for a goal. So putting it all together, I just feel like Palmer and Saka are slightly better FPL options, and I think that will reflect in the points coming up. That being said, I still have a really good feeling about Ollie Watkins, so it is difficult for me, but that's why I've chosen Palmer and Saka. On top of that, I also desperately want Phil Foden, and I think many people will be disappointed that Phil Foden isn't in my wildcard draft. I did put out a tweet yesterday that said I had a few differentials in my draft. Who do you think I've got? And most people suggested Foden was going to be the one, because you guys know how much I like Foden in FPL. I've owned him so much in the last 2 or 3 seasons. I do still think it's slightly too early. The issue that I have in FPL is getting on a player early is half of the battle. Like, you don't want to bring in a player. Like, if Foden goes and gets back-to-back braces now and then I bring him in, well, everyone's going to own him. Like, you want to get on a player before they start doing well, which is kind of the thought process with Leif Davis, by the way. But you don't really want to bring in a player that has already got loads of points. I'm not saying this was a bad pick, by the way, but I'll point to Luis Diaz. Luis Diaz already had 51 points in 5 game weeks. I did kind of suggest that on a wildcard you could go without, because he's kind of scored a lot of the points that you would expect. He's not going to continue at 10 points per game week. So I do also feel like, whilst this is slightly too early to jump on Foden, it could also be a nice point to do so because not many people will own him. But I just feel like minutes-wise and fitness-wise, there was a quote from Pep after the Champions League game which said that Foden played very well. He's getting back to full fitness, and step by step he's getting there. I don't like that idea of step by step. I want Foden to be there when I bring him in. So, the idea behind Palmer and Saka is they are both so brilliant, and they're both almost set and forget and almost fixture-proof, that you could just leave them both in. So for now, I'm just going to leave them in, and I don't mind if I have to just keep them there for the foreseeable future. But I also have in my mind that in game week 9, Foden plays against Southampton at home. So you've got Fulham at home and Wolves away for the next 2. And in game week 9, Foden plays Southampton at home. Saka plays Liverpool, then Newcastle, then Chelsea. I still see returns for Saka, by the way. But if for Foden, I can have Southampton, Bournemouth, Brighton, they are a better run of fixtures, and that would also free up some funds for me. So I've penciled in, but not booked in, by the way, possibly doing Saka to Foden in game week 9, which would free up the funds to then be able to upgrade Rodgers or Dibbling. So I am only saying that I'm going to start Rodgers for the next 2 or 3 weeks, probably. If I end up not freeing up those funds and not being able to, well, then I still think Rodgers is fantastic. So on Rodgers, I think there's a bit of a price bias with Rodgers. The only reason that people look at it and say you can't have Rodgers in your starting 11 is because of how cheap he is. Like, if we look at attacking returns, he's had 3 in the last 2 weeks. On top of, is it 3 in the last 2 weeks? Yeah, I think so. 3 in the last 2 weeks. He's scored a goal. Now he's got assists. He's created big chances. He's had big chances himself. The fixtures aren't awful over the next 3 or 4. United, Fulham, Bournemouth, Spurs. I expect him to get some attacking returns there. And then in that game against Liverpool, I could play Tyler Dibbling instead if I need him, and he's still starting at that point. So I kind of feel okay playing Rodgers. And I think if I told you Rodgers was 6.5, you wouldn't bat an eyelid at the idea of me starting Rodgers. It's only because he is so cheap at 5.2 that it feels maybe a bit dodgy starting him. So that's why at the moment I do have Rodgers as a pretty much permanent starter in my team, which a lot of people won't like, but it allows me to squeeze in double Arsenal defence, Palmer, Saka and Burmo. And when you look at my attack, it's quite an expensive attack as well. So Rodgers, yeah, it's not ideal having to start him every week, but I also don't necessarily mind it. The player that people won't like is Tyler Dibbling, because Dibbling really isn't, and I would say this myself, a player that you want to rely on a regular basis. And let me be honest, I'm not. So the idea with Tyler Dibbling here is with my other 7 attackers, they are all pretty nailed on. In fact, when you look at them in a second, I would say they are very nailed on, the 7 attackers that I have, unless something changes. So with my 7 attackers, I'm not expecting any of them to miss out due to rotation. So immediately, I won't need Dibbling to come on. You wouldn't expect anyway, due to random pieces of rotation. So the only time I need Dibbling, really, is if I get an injury and I don't want to make a transfer, or to rotate a player out with a difficult fixture. For most of my attackers, I would play them through difficult fixtures. In Burmo, Palmer, Saka, and even to some extent Rodgers, I don't mind playing them when they have a difficult fixture. But there is one attacker that I've got that doesn't have a good fixture in Game Week 8, which I'll discuss in a second, and Dibbling has Leicester at home in Game Week 8. So honestly, the only reason Dibbling is in there is really because he's so cheap and I can't afford many other players at that price. Well, I can only afford up to 4.7 million, I believe it is. And also with Dibbling, he's got a brilliant fixture against Leicester at home next week, which is the only week that I can foresee really needing him. So that's why he's in there. When you see my other attacker, it will make a lot more sense in a second. But I still think Dibbling is okay value. He's starting most games for Southampton. He's got some okay fixtures depending on when you need him. And it allows me to fund the rest of the team, which is basically, I know it's not an idea, but if I could afford someone like a Dwight McNeil in that spot, I would absolutely prefer to have Dwight McNeil. So Dwight McNeil is one player that I would like to have in the midfield. In terms of other players that I would like, I'd love Mohamed Salah. Mohamed Salah is a player that will continue to be disrespected due to the fact that obviously people want Erling Haaland, which is being included, and also the likes of Palmer and Saka. People forget about Salah. Another goal and an assist in the Champions League. The man will continue to return. I'd love to have Mohamed Salah, but I just can't quite afford him. Like I said, Dwight McNeil. And then the other player that I would really like, or set of players, is probably a Spurs midfielder. I think Maddison, Johnson, and Kulusevski are 3 fantastic options. And in my draft that I showed you earlier in the week, I had Johnson/Kulusevski in there. I've just transitioned to a 3-4-3 because what my options are is a forward and Dibbling, or Kulusevski Johnson, and then a 4.5 forward. And because I think Dibbling is at least an okay midfielder to have as an 8th attacker, I've just about leaned towards this 3-4-3 formation instead. So there we go. That's a very rambly section, but I'm extremely happy with the midfield, regardless of the fact that I have to start Rodgers most weeks. Let's now take a look at the 3 attackers, and the whole team will make a little bit more sense when we can see it. So, guys, moving on to the front 3, and at the moment it is Haaland, Solanke, and Cunha. And, of course, the big one that people wouldn't have probably expected would be Cunha, which I'll explain in a second because it's a proper gut-feeling pick that I'm excited by, and it's just nice to see a slightly different player in the team, but I'll explain the justification in a second. So with Erling Haaland, again, a lot of people are slightly upset that I've decided to go with Haaland and they want me to continue this sort of experiment of no Haaland. And listen, there will be points this season where I think no Haaland is viable. And from game week 12 and beyond, I do think that a lot of people will decide to go without Haaland because Palmer, Saka, Watkins, to some extent Son, and you can cover Haaland with Foden, etc. But a lot of these other semi-premiums or slightly cheaper premiums have a really nice run of fixtures. Even Mohamed Salah, by the way, from game week 12 and onwards, has a really nice set of fixtures. So I think a lot of people will be on like Palmer, Saka, Salah, and decide to sacrifice Haaland in game week 12. So don't worry, I'm not saying to go with Haaland for the remainder of the season. But for me, when I look at the upcoming set of fixtures, Haaland is the best captain in all of the next 5. For me, at least, definitely for the next 3. You could justify captaining Saka this week. This is the only week where I think there is justification to go against Haaland. But when I look at game weeks 8 and 9, there just aren't any really good standout captains for me because Palmer's got Liverpool and Newcastle. I suppose you could captain him against Newcastle if you wanted to, but they're not great fixtures. Saka's got Bournemouth and Liverpool, whereas Haaland's got Wolves and Southampton. I just think that Haaland's the best captain. And for me, the reason that you spend that much on Haaland is for captaincy. So if you're not captaining Haaland every week, then yeah, consider going without. But if you are, or you think you would, that's why it justifies the price for me. So yeah, I'd rather not have Haaland because then I wouldn't have to start Davis and Rodgers every week. I'd have a stronger bench. I'd be able to get Trent in there. I'd be able to squeeze in a Watkins and maybe even a Foden. Like you can get all of them. Or Mohamed Salah in there is a nice, slightly cheaper alternative. But just due to the fixtures, I will be owning Erling Haaland from probably game week 7 to 11. But from 12 onwards, let's have that discussion again around whether we need to have Erling Haaland. Solanke is a player that has been in every single one of my drafts. He's arguably, along with Gabriel and Haaland and Burmo, those 4 are the only ones that have been in every single draft. For me, with Solanke, he's playing in an incredibly attacking Spurs side. He's getting so many chances. He may still be on pens. Everyone assumes it's Son, but I wouldn't be 100% sure about that. And his minutes are ridiculously good. Even against Man United, when everyone was being brought off because the game was done, Solanke's still on the pitch, and that's why he gets the goal at the end. And I think it's incredibly underrated having a player that is on the pitch at the end, because a lot of goals in the Premier League are scored in the final 10, 5, 15 minutes, and Solanke's always on the pitch. So the minutes, the fact that he's playing in such a good side, the fixtures coming up as well, Brighton, West Ham, Palace, Villa, and Ipswich, those 5 are really strong. I just think there are enough reasons. He's had 7 big chances in the last 2 weeks, Solanke. Like, what more do you want, apart from converting more of those big chances? But for me, Solanke's a really good pick at a very nice price. So Haaland and Solanke have been in every draft. And then it's that final spot. And at the moment, I do have Matheus Cunha. Again, if you look back to my wildcard draft earlier in the week, I had Brennan Johnson instead of Cunha, and I was playing a 3-5-2. And I'll be honest, that is still a possibility. So I could play a 3-5-2 instead with a Spurs mid, or potentially even like a Dwight McNeil, and that would give me a lot more funds. The other possibility is just going for another forward that has been performing well this season, such as Calvert-Lewin or Chris Wood. So why Matheus Cunha? So I'll jump over to the official site just to give you a bit more context. So for me, what do I want from an asset? And we always go through the same stuff. I want them to be pretty nailed on, preferably a 90-minute man, as we just spoke about with Solanke and Mbeumo. Being on the pitch at the end is a very big advantage. So preferably a 90-minute man, preferably playing for a side that do create chances, not playing for a completely blunt attack, and also preferably being on penalties and some set pieces if possible. For Matheus Cunha, I believe he's a 90-minute man, and I've checked with a couple of Wolves fans, they agree. I know he got 33 and 67 in the first 2. He was coming back from a slight knock or injury. Since then, he's played 4 90 minutes in a row. I don't think Wolves are a bad attack. You have to consider, I know Wolves haven't been good this season, and even regardless of fixtures, they haven't been good. But they've played Arsenal, Chelsea, Forest, Newcastle, Villa, Liverpool. That's not a very nice run of fixtures. So you have to take into account the context there of the fixtures that they've had. And also, we believe that Cunha should be on penalties. Strand Larsen hasn't really taken penalties in his career thus far, and Sarabia and Hwang aren't really starting on a consistent basis. Therefore, they probably aren't going to be on penalties either. So we think Cunha should be on pens. So he's a 90-minute man on pens playing for an attack that I don't think is particularly bad. And then it's the fixtures for me. So in Game Week 7, Brentford away, I think is actually a really good fixture. Brentford have not been defending particularly well. They'll see this as their first real winnable fixture outside of maybe that Forest game in which they got a draw. So they'll see this as the game they need to go out and prove a point and get 3 points. In Game Week 8, well, I play Tyler Dibbling, right? So where is Dibbling in my team? So Dibbling's here. So Dibbling in Game Week 8 as that Leicester at home game. So I don't have to play Cunha against Man City because I can play Dibbling instead. We'll just go Maria just to get the fixtures back up for Wolves. Then in Game Week 9 onwards, he's got Brighton, Palace, Southampton, Fulham, Bournemouth, Everton, West Ham, Ipswich, Leicester. That is a remarkable run of fixtures. And I'll be honest, I probably / might not own Cunha for all of these. Unless Cunha's smashing it, it might be that Cunha's sold. But if I have other issues that crop up, having what I think is a 90-minute man on penalties with this set of fixtures here, it feels like one of those, like, I've seen so many content creators talking about forwards this week. 90% of them haven't even mentioned Cunha. It's not even that they've said he's a bad pick. They've not even mentioned him. And that might be to say that he's not great, but I like that he's not even entering people's thinking. Like, I don't know what his ownership is, actually. Let's have a look. It's 2.3%. It just feels like a pick that no one else is considering. And that's not a good enough reason just to pick him, but he ticks a lot of the boxes. And also, when I watch Cunha, he excites me. He's attacking, like, he gets me off my seat. Like, and I said this season, I want to play a bit more eye test based as well. And every time I watch Cunha, I'm very impressed. Also, his data this season isn't bad, 0.45 XGI. Last season, he had a very good XGI as well, so it's not just this season. And I'm not saying that's particularly great, but it's comparable to the likes of a Calvert-Lewin or a Chris Wood. So I guess it's just a bit of a bet against the crowd, but also just trusting my gut feeling a bit and picking a player that I just like to watch with a nice set of upcoming fixtures. So yeah, there's the justification, the explanation for it. And so if I go back to my team, this is the way it's currently lining up. And I guess worst case scenario, by the way, I have 2 free transfers now. So going into Game Week 8, when I come out of the wildcard, I'm going to have 2 free transfers to use after the international break. Things could crop up over the international break. Or if going into Game Week 9 or 10, I just think, do you know what? I've made a bit of a mistake. Wolves continue to look really poor, even with the better fixtures. Cunha's not really getting the chances. Well, then it is an easy downgrade or sell to Delap, to Calvert-Lewin, to Wood. And yeah, it requires an extra transfer, but it's not a disaster. I'm not committing to owning Cunha for the rest of the season. I'm just betting with the fixtures coming up against Brentford, Brighton, Palace and Southampton, with 2 of those being at home, it could be worth the punt. And obviously, I really like the fact that next week I just bench Cunha against City, and assuming Dibbling is going to start, I can play Dibbling against Leicester at home. So yeah, that's the team. I'd love to know what you think of it. It's slightly different, but not massively. I think the big difference in comparison to Game Week 6 wildcard is that I've managed to squeeze Palmer and Saka in. I do have Davis in there, who's a slightly different pick to some other to some other managers, and also Cunha's a slightly cheeky pick as well. People will point to the bench being very cheap. It absolutely is. But I don't think it will be long-term. And I also think if Vandenberg can nail down a spot, he's basically a 4.5 defender, but he's just very cheap. Mikalenko is basically a 4.5 defender, and Dibbling will probably be upgraded soon anyway. So that's the team. I'd love to know what you think of it down below. And let me just now show you what it looks like for future weeks, give you a bit of an idea about my possible transfer plans. So guys, just jumping over to Fantasy Football Hub to show you what my team looks like for the upcoming game weeks. And if you do still want to get access to Fantasy Football Hub to plan ahead, especially around your wildcard, and just look at what your team looks like for coming weeks, because you need to start planning ahead at this point in the season. There is a link down below to get 30% off from Fantasy Football Hub. I highly recommend checking it out. It's extremely useful for weeks such as these. By the way, don't stress that it says minus 0.7. It's because it hasn't taken into account all of the price changes and value and stuff I have tied up. So I do have 0.2 million in the bank at the moment. And so this is the way the team would line up for Game Week 7. They obviously recommend that I start Vandenberg, but I just think if I'm starting Cunha, I might as well back Cunha and back that they'll score. So in this case, I think I'm probably looking at starting Leif Davis against West Ham away. So going into Game Week 8, it is post-international break. So I can sit here and say, oh, I'm planning on rolling a transfer, but we all know what happens over the international break. There is a risk associated that something happens and I'm forced into using a transfer. But if I'm not, I'm just going to rock with this team. And I know I've got Rico Lewis, who might not start, but that's fine because this week I've got Mikalenko against Ipswich away on the bench. So I have that cover, which is what I spoke about. And as I said, this is the week where I currently plan on playing Dibbling against Leicester at home rather than Cunha against City at home. However, maybe if we get a leak that Lewis isn't starting, and let's say I end up, I don't know, starting Mikalenko, then maybe I do just start Cunha and just say, do you know what? I'm going to back Wolves to score against City, and I don't need to start Dibbling. So that's a possibility. But yeah, at the moment, let's just say that I'll do probably something like this. Maybe I'll start Mikalenko. I don't know. It'll be Mikalenko or Lewis starting, and then Dibbling or Cunha. But I plan on hopefully rolling a transfer. Then in game week 9, this is where I possibly do plan on using my first free transfer, which is, as I said, I'm looking at Phil Foden. So at the moment, the plan is probably Saka out, Foden in. But Palmer, if I'm like really not impressed with Chelsea and Palmer, he could be the one that makes way. And it might be that I just decide not to make this. Maybe Foden only starts 1. He doesn't look particularly good. He still doesn't look fully fit. Maybe KDB's back at this point, and I'm just thinking, do you know what? There's too much risk. But Phil Foden is always a player that if I can get on him slightly early and ahead of the curve, I will try to do so. And so that would free up enough money, about 0.9 million, depending upon price changes, to either upgrade Rodgers all the way to a 6 million plus player, or at this point I say, do you know what, yeah, I need to probably upgrade that Dibbling spot. If I upgrade Dibbling, I could go for someone like a Dwight McNeil, who I think is a really decent option. I was actually just having a look at the fixtures here, I don't know if you're able to see, yeah, so from sort of game week 9 to 13, a Brentford midfielder, I don't think there's anyone that really stands out to me there. Potentially you could go for a Carvalho or a Sharda if he's getting good minutes. Man United, if Ahmad or Garnacho are getting good minutes, I'd obviously have to upgrade Rodgers and maybe make another move to get to a Garnacho. Although, depending upon price changes, Garnacho might be affordable at that point. Nottingham Forest, Alanga, Hudson-Odoi, if they're getting good enough minutes, even a Gibbs-White, but again, I don't know that I'll be fully able to afford him. Dwight McNeil is the obvious one. I could go for a Palace midfielder, but again, no one stands out. Fulham got on a decent run at this point. So they play Everton, Brentford, Palace, Wolves. So maybe even something like Rodgers to Smith Rowe could be an okay shout, especially if he's dropped in price at that point. So anyway, there are possibilities. Let's just say for now, would I do Rodgers to Smith Rowe? Maybe this is the point to do it. Maybe if Smith Rowe's still getting good minutes, maybe I say, yeah, Rodgers to Smith Rowe. I don't need Dibbling still. He can just sit on the bench. And so let me just make those transfers. So let's say I do something like that. And you can see each week I've got Mikalenko starting against Fulham at home here, but I have Vandenberg and Davis on the bench who actually have pretty decent fixtures. Then the week after, the team still has a really nice set of fixtures, especially if I brought in Foden and Smith Rowe. Like, I'm not going to keep going because I don't know if in any given week I would have used a transfer or things would have cropped up that will free up funds. But I guess this is just to go to show why I think the structure could work quite well, why I like Cunha as a pick, why I don't mind Dibbling covering Cunha, why I don't mind the slightly cheaper defence. But around game week 12, this is a week where I think there could be some switches because City play against Spurs and Liverpool. And so Haaland and Foden and Lewis, and then Forest after that, by the way, is not an overly nice run for City. And if I've got Foden and Haaland at that point, I'm looking at possibly doing something like, and again, this is way in the future, so we probably don't need to worry now, Salah in for Foden, Haaland down to maybe even someone like an Ollie Watkins who doesn't have a bad run. And I'm also thinking, is there a way to maybe, for me, squeeze in Saka as well back into the team, or move Solanke to someone like a Havertz? I can imagine in game week 12, if we can build up the free transfers, which is always the big if, there'll be a real redistribution of funds, probably away from a Haaland draft to a Salah draft. That's my prediction at the moment, but we'll have to wait and see how that goes. So yeah, that's the team at the moment. Listen, lots could change between now and then, but I'm pretty happy with the team. So if we actually skip back to it, this is it. There are imbalances. The bench is weak. The defence is a little bit weak, but I like the fact I've got Palmer, Saka and Haaland. I'm happy with a few differentials, and I'm feeling pretty settled with the draft. But I'd love to know what you think of it down below in the comments. So guys, there we have it. That is my Game Week 7 wildcard team selection. If you did enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button. Make sure to subscribe if you are new around here as well. I do really appreciate all of the support recently. But until next time, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.